We begin with three trusted reporters who have been friends of this program throughout the campaign. Kristen Welker, White House correspondent for NBC News and co-anchor of Weekend Today. She also served, as you know, as the steady and sharp moderator of that final presidential debate. Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, and today we learned the winner of the National Association of Black Journalists Award for Journalist of the Year. Congratulations, Yamiche. And Dan Balz, chief correspondent for The Washington Post. So glad to have you all here on this important Friday evening. Let's begin with a quick listen to the closing arguments on the pandemic, which has killed nearly 230,000 Americans. And as case numbers spike, here is what they're saying.
If you vote for Biden, it means no kids in school, no graduations, no weddings, no Thanksgiving, no Christmas.
I'm not going to shut down the economy. I'm not going to shut down the country, but I'm going to shut down the virus.
COVID, 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 COVID. By the way, on November 4th, you won't hear about it anymore.
Dr. Fauci called last week for a mask mandate. This isn't a political statement. It's patriotic duty, for God's sake.
Kristen, when you're talking to your sources at the White House, do they believe the president's argument on the pandemic is breaking through, or are swing voters, women in the suburbs, not convinced?
Well, Bob, thanks for having me, and thanks for that introduction. Look, I think there is some trepidation about President Trump trying to turn the page on the COVID crisis, even among some of his closest advisors and allies. Yes, they acknowledge that they want him to try to project confidence, but they don't want him to appear out of step with the reality on the ground. And what are we seeing as we head into the final 4 days of this race? Cases of COVID spiking in key battleground states, Bob, and all across the country. Frankly, they want his message to be clear. They want it to be targeted. They also want him to focus more on the economy. We got a strong report on the GDP growth earlier this week. They want him to stay focused on that. As you know, he spent a lot of time on the campaign trail in these key battleground states, taking aim at some of his political rivals. And so not staying focused on what they think continues to be his strongest talking point, which is the economy. And I can tell you, I was out talking to voters, and those who support him continue to go back to that argument. They say, look, we think ultimately he is going to be the best person for our bottom line, for our business. And so that's why his advisors want him to stay on track, want him to stay on message, Bob.
And Yamiche, you've spent a lot of time talking to voters in Florida, such a critical state. What have you learned?
What I've learned is that if you're a supporter of President Trump, then you get on board with this idea that the coronavirus has had too much attention and it's occupying too much space in the media landscape. You get on board with the idea that even if you get the coronavirus, that it's not that bad, that it won't kill you. You get on board with the idea that it's somewhat like the flu. What we do know, of course, as Kristen just said, is that the coronavirus is spiking all across the country, 47 states. Today, we passed 9 million cases overall in the United States. So if you're a Trump supporter, you're looking at those numbers and saying, well, those numbers are bad, but it doesn't matter who is president, these numbers would still be bad. What I hear from supporters of Joe Biden is that they feel as though the president's message is callous. They think that it's ridiculous for the president to be walking around talking about the fact that he got the coronavirus and he's okay, because of course he had access to some of the best medical care. And I'm hearing from Biden supporters a real nervousness that also, when they look at the polls, that while they don't like the president's message, President Trump's message, they're worried that the person that they are supporting, Joe Biden, that he might not get the turnout needed in key battleground states like Florida, like Wisconsin, like Pennsylvania, to make sure that this election goes his way. When you talk to supporters of the president, also the one thing that I'm really struck by is the way that you view this election is really life or death, and the way that you view the coronavirus, it goes hand in hand with the way that you view who you're voting and who you're supporting in this election.
Dan, those are high stakes. You study polls as closely as anyone. Is the Biden campaign nervous that the pandemic might not be the driver in terms of voter energy that they hoped, in terms of getting swing voters and independent voters to listen closely to the vice president?
I think, Bob, and first of all, let me just say congratulations to Kristen and to Yamiche. Those are both wonderful things that they've done, and I congratulate them. Back to the polls. I think the Biden campaign feels as though they are in a good place. But given what happened in 2016, there has to be nervousness. If you talk to people around the Biden campaign, they express confidence. But there are many Democrats who are nervous. I talked to a Republican strategist today, and he said, in many ways, if you look at the polling, could argue that this campaign is in pretty good hands for Biden to win it. And yet, he said, because of what happened in 2016, many people are unwilling to do that. There is still a path for the president to win this, and so there's nervousness all around. But in the key states at this point, the Biden campaign feels as though they go into Election Day and with the early voting in a pretty decent position.
Let's get into this idea of turnout on the Democratic side and energy. And one of the moments this week that really mattered in my notebook is when President Obama returned to the campaign trail in Orlando, Florida, as Democrats tried to revive the Obama coalition.
We've got to turn out like never before, Orlando. We have to leave no doubt. We can't be complacent. We were complacent last time. Folks got a little lazy. Folks took things for granted, and look what happened.
Kristen, what does President Obama's re-entry onto the scene mean for Democrats in places like Philadelphia, your home city, and in places like Georgia in the Deep South?
Well, there's no one who energizes Democrats and, frankly, the coalition that put President Obama into office like Mr. Obama. He is the person who energizes the Democratic base, also brings together some independents, those suburban women that are going to be so critical that this election is ultimately going to turn on. And don't forget, he is the best character witness for Joe Biden. And so he is there taking aim at President Trump in ways that we have not seen, frankly, until he has hit the trail in recent days, and really serving to underscore Biden's key point, which is that he thinks he's going to be better at fighting COVID-19. So this is going to be critical, particularly as we are seeing rates of early voting that we did not see in 2016. Democrats outpacing Republicans. That is what you would expect. So the question is going to be, can Republicans match that turnout and beat it on Election Day? Democrats are feeling confident, though, about these early numbers. It's worth noting that by Election Day, Bob, we're expecting 2/3 of the expected electorate to have already voted. That is significant. The question is, where are those votes going? But undoubtedly, former President Obama is going to be significant in terms of energizing that coalition of voters to the polls.
And what about that Bernie Sanders coalition, Yamiche? You've covered Senator Sanders for years. I noticed Senator Harris, Vice President Biden's running mate, has been campaigning with him this week. Are the Sanders voters going to come out based on your reporting?
Based on my reporting, the Sanders voters see Joe Biden as a more palpable person that they can back, as opposed to Hillary Clinton. In 2016, we saw a real anti-Hillary Clinton sentiment among former Sanders supporters, rather. They were people that never really got on board with Hillary Clinton. I'm not seeing that same feeling when I talk to former Sanders supporters. I was in Miami talking to a young black man who said, I'm voting for Joe Biden. I'm not enthusiastic. He wasn't my first pick. I was really hoping Bernie would get in there, that he would be able to have a more progressive tone, that the Democratic Party would go more to the AOC wing with the Green New Deal and banning fracking and all sorts of things. That being said, the voters, especially in the Democratic Party, they see President Trump as an existential threat. They see him as a threat to democracy. They also see him as a threat to their daily lives when you think about not only the coronavirus, but also police killings and criminal justice in this country. So my feeling on the ground is that the progressives are more energized by Joe Biden than they were Hillary Clinton. The big question, of course, is can Joe Biden run up the numbers enough so that the coalition that he builds, which will likely be different from the coalition from Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, can he build a coalition that outpaces the coalition that we're seeing in the Trump campaign? The Trump campaign feels very good about their numbers when it comes to places like Florida. They feel like they can run up white, non-college educated Americans, suburban women they still feel good about. But the big question is, can they turn out the Trump coalition that came out in 2016 again? And of course, that is the big question.
Dan, you've written a column this week about Wisconsin and Michigan and the Midwest. What is the outlook there? We see this blizzard of polling, but what is your veteran perspective on what's going on in the Midwest?
Well, Bob, those are the three keys to this election. There are many states in play. There's a lot of competition in a lot of places. But I think most people believe that this race is likely to come down to those three states. If the president is able to hold everything in the South that he won before, wins again in Ohio and Iowa, both of which are competitive, but which he won pretty easily last time, then those three states that you mentioned are the keys to the outcome. Throughout the fall, Vice President Biden has held a lead of 4 points, 5 points, 6 points, 8 points. You look at different polls there in different places, but he has held a fairly steady lead. But it is not necessarily an insurmountable lead because we don't know what the composition of the electorate ultimately is going to be like. We've all been poring over these early vote numbers, trying to read clues and get signs and signals, but it's very difficult because we don't know what's left among the people who haven't voted and how they're going to break. We assume that the Election Day vote will be much more heavily in favor of President Trump. We know that the early vote in many places has been more heavily in favor of Biden. But in those three states, these could be close, or Biden might have a lead that is sustainable and gets him through. The other thing to know about those states is that none of them is likely to have full results on the night of the election. They have a lot of unprocessed mail ballots that will take hours and perhaps days before they're fully counted.
Dan, and just to be clear, you're talking about Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Correct. Yes, those three states. None of them can begin to process until, well, Michigan on Monday and the other two on Tuesday. So it will be a slow process. Everybody needs to be patient.